Hello and welcome to our channel. I'm so glad you found your way here to our quiet little corner of the world. All you need to do now is breathe and listen. Let my voice be your guide as we drift away into tonight's story. Hello and welcome back to our channel. I know these stories often keep you company as you drift off to sleep, but before your eyes get heavy, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from and what time is it right now. Story 1. A girl disappeared during what should have been a normal holiday with her dad and older brother, while her mother, who had stayed at home, was left devastated and searching for answers. Everyone suspected she had been abducted, but no one truly knew what had occurred. Then 10 years later, her older brother reveals the shocking truth about what really happened on that trip with their dad. The fluorescent lights of the clinic corridor seemed to flicker more intensely at this late hour. Or perhaps it was just Anya Croft's exhaustion playing tricks on her perception. At 43, she felt at least a decade older as she signed off her charts. At the nurse's station, her colleagues waved goodnight as she gathered her things, her body moving on autopilot after an 11-hour shift. "See you tomorrow, Anya," called one of the younger nurses. "Bright and early," Anya replied, though there was nothing bright about starting her morning shift at the nursery before returning to the clinic in the afternoon. But bills didn't pay themselves, and single-handedly supporting a family of 3, to now required sacrifices. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, a welcome coolness after the sterile warmth of the clinic. The bus was late as usual, giving her mind unwelcome time to wander. 10 years since her daughter Nadia disappeared on that family vacation in Morocco. 10 years of searching, pleading, praying. 10 years of a husband slowly deteriorating into a shell of himself, drowning his guilt in alcohol. 10 years of watching her son Liam grow up with the shadow of his sister's absence hanging over him. When the bus finally arrived, Anya took a seat by the window, resting her forehead against the cool glass as suburban houses blurred past. By the time she reached her stop, it was nearly 11 p.m. The darkened windows told their own story. No one had waited up for her. The front door creaked. As she entered, the silence of the house enveloping her immediately. She moved quietly through the darkened living room, her nurse's training making her steps light and deliberate. Pausing at Liam's door, she gently pushed it open. The dim light from the hallway casting a thin stripe across his sleeping form. At 20, he still slept, curled slightly on his side, just as he had as a child. She resisted the urge to brush the dark hair from his forehead, not wanting to disturb him. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Anya set her nursing bag down on the dressing table, methodically unpacking her stethoscope, pens, and ID badge. The empty bed didn't surprise her. Alan was out again, undoubtedly at one of the local bars. She sighed deeply, the weight of her exhaustion settling into her bones. After a quick shower that did little to ease her muscle tension, Anya changed into an old t-shirt and comfortable pants. She checked her phone, typing a quick message to Alan. "Where are you? It's late." She knew there would likely be no response, but the ritual of checking in had become a habit she couldn't break. Settling at the small desk in the corner of the bedroom, Anya opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her tired face as she logged into her email, checking for any new messages from the various missing persons forums and groups she'd joined over the years. Most was spam or well-intended, but useless tips that led nowhere. Still, she scrolled through them meticulously as she did every night. As she conducted her nightly research, guilt gnawed at her core, a familiar, constant companion. If only she hadn't been working that day. If only she had joined them on that vacation from the beginning. Her second job as a nursery teacher had been relatively new then, taken on when Alan's naval disability benefits were reduced. They needed the extra income, and she thought the vacation would be good for Alan. A chance for him to bond with the children away from his mounting depression. It will be therapeutic, his therapist had suggested, and Anya had agreed. A chance to reset. Isabel, their family friend, had echoed. She was supposed to join them later that week, but an emergency at the clinic had kept her. The irony wasn't lost on her while she'd been saving strangers' lives in the trauma unit. Her own daughter had vanished without a trace. Anya rubbed her throbbing temples, closing her eyes against the glare of the screen. The burden she carried seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, not lighter as people promised grief would become. She worked endlessly trying to provide some semblance of stability for what remained of her family. Though Liam had started working at the local convenience store, she insisted he save his earnings for his future. She wouldn't let her son's prospects diminish because of their circumstances. The sound of the front door opening downstairs pulled her from her thoughts. Heavy footsteps made their uneven way up the stairs, and moments later, Alan appeared in the doorway. His once handsome face was bloated from years of drinking, his naval-trained physique long since softened. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes clung to him. Still at it, he slurred, gesturing toward the laptop. "Don't you ever give up." Anya closed the screen partially, already bracing herself for the argument that was sure to follow. "You're drunk again. So, what if I am?" Alan leaned against the doorframe, his balance uncertain. "You left Liam alone," she said, her voice tight with contained anger. Alan scoffed. "He's 24, Christ's sake, not a child. He can manage to be home alone, probably even likes the freedom." "No one likes to be alone, Alan." Anya stood, her fatigue momentarily forgotten in the face of her mounting frustration. "You're not working. The least you could do while I spend all my energy earning money for this family is spend some quality time with your son rather than wasting my hard-earned money on alcohol." "Here we go again." Alan rolled his eyes. "The martyr speech. If you had saved all the money you've spent on beer over the years, I could probably afford to go to Morocco and search for Nadia myself." Alan's expression darkened. "It's been 10 years, Anya. 10 years. You won't find her even if you went there." "You're too drunk for this conversation," Anya said, turning away from him. "You were probably drunk that evening, too, weren't you? When Nadia disappeared. It was your fault. You were there with her, and you didn't keep an eye on her." Alan's face contorted with anger. "Don't you dare blame me. That girl just left the hotel and never came back. We were together spending the whole day at the beach, but she had to disappear by herself in the evening. Liam was there in the hotel, too, so I can't be the only one responsible." Liam was only 10. Anya's voice rose. "You can't expect a child to keep an eye on his 8-year-old sister all the time." The argument escalated rapidly, both of them hurling accusations fueled by a decade of unresolved grief and resentment. Anya felt her control slipping, the careful facade she maintained crumbling under the weight of her exhaustion and Alan's belligerence. "I'm done with this," she finally said, moving toward the door. "I'm sleeping downstairs tonight." But as she tried to pass him, Alan grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight. "Don't you walk away from me," he growled, his eyes narrowed. "You will show me some respect." "Let go of me," Anya said, her voice low and dangerous. "You don't deserve any respect. For being a drunkard." "I'm an ex-naval man," Alan shouted, pushing her back against the wall with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. He raised his hand, and Anya flinched, preparing for the blow, but it never came. A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Liam stood in the doorway of his room downstairs, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim light, witnessing the entire confrontation. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken tension. Then Alan released her, storming into the bedroom and slamming the door behind him. The distinct click of the lock followed. Anya leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to steady her breathing before descending the stairs to her son. When she reached him, she wrapped her arms around him, her maternal instinct overriding her own distress. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," she whispered. Liam's face was grim, his jaw tight. "You can sleep in my bedroom tonight," he said. "It's big enough, and I don't mind. I can sleep on the sofa." "No, sweetheart. You sleep in your room, I'll stay here in the living room." She attempted a reassuring smile. "I don't think I could sleep right now anyway." Liam frowned. "I'm scared he might come after you again if he sees you sleeping on the sofa." Anya looked at her son, no longer a boy, but a young man with eyes too old for his years, and nodded. "Okay, thank you. Did he hit you?" Liam asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. "No," Anya assured him, touching his cheek gently. "Everything is fine. How was your therapy session today?" Liam shrugged, clearly unwilling to elaborate. "Fine, same as always." Anya followed him into his bedroom, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she felt. "You're right, I should sleep. I have the morning shift at the nursery tomorrow, and then the clinic in the afternoon." They said goodnight, and Liam left to settle on the living room sofa. Anya closed the bedroom door and sank onto her son's bed, the familiar scent of his laundry, detergent surrounding her. As she lay there in the darkness, her thoughts drifted to how drastically their lives had changed. Alan had been injured during his naval deployment, a severe shrapnel injury to his right leg from an IED explosion that resulted in partial loss of mobility and chronic nerve pain. He had undergone multiple surgeries, including a metal rod implant, which had drained their savings and strained their finances severely. On top of the physical injuries, he had been diagnosed with PTSD, which he continually used as a reason why he could no longer work. Over the years, his condition worsened. Staying at home with no purpose or structure only deepened his depression and dependency on alcohol. Anya's tears dampened the pillow as she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her circumstances. A missing daughter, a broken husband, a son bearing scars she couldn't see, and the exhaustion of holding it all together with increasingly frayed strength. Anya jolted awake to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then recognized Liam's bedroom. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and felt her heart drop as she saw the time. 10 a.m. She had completely missed her morning shift at the nursery. No, she muttered, sitting up too quickly and feeling a rush of dizziness. She checked her notifications and saw 3 missed calls and a message from the school. Principal asking why she hadn't shown up or called in. Panic seized her as she jumped out of bed. The nursery class ran from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., which meant she had completely missed it. She quickly typed a reply to the principal, promising to come to the school to explain the situation in person. Anya hurried out of Liam's room and scanned the empty house. The sofa where Liam had slept was vacant, the blanket neatly folded. He must have left for his convenience store job already. She checked the master bedroom upstairs, finding it similarly deserted. There was no sign of Alan, though the lingering smell of stale alcohol remained. She changed into fresh clothes, foregoing a shower to save time, and hurried to catch the bus to the school. Her mind raced with worry about her job security. She couldn't afford to lose any income, especially with Alan contributing nothing. As the bus approached the school, Anya spotted the principal, Mr. Evans, locking the school gate. She rushed toward him, her heart pounding. "Mr. Evans, I'm so sorry about this morning," she called out. The principal turned, his expression a mixture of concern and professional composure. "Anya, I was worried when you didn't show up. It's not like you to miss work without notice. I know, and I'm truly sorry." Anya tried to catch her breath. "There was a situation at home last night, and I somehow slept through my alarm." Mr. Evans studied her face. "You know, Anya, I've been meaning to talk to you about your schedule. Working 8 hours every evening at the clinic, plus this morning job. And I know you pick up weekend shifts at that restaurant, too. It's just too much. I was wondering, when something like this would happen. Anya felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassment mixing with the fear of losing her position. I know it seems like a lot, but I can manage it. Today was just Mr. Evans held up a hand. Tell you what, I won't count it against you this time. Consider it a day off, but I want you to think about managing your schedule better. The children need a teacher who's alert and present. Relief washed over her. Thank you, Mr. Evans. I promise this won't happen again. As the principal got into his car and drove away, Anya checked the time. She had several hours before her 2 p.m. shift at the clinic, an unexpected pocket of free time in her normally packed schedule. A sudden idea came to her. She could surprise Liam with lunch at his workplace. It had been ages since they'd shared a meal without Alan's brooding presence. She headed toward the market area to pick up ingredients for a simple lunchbox, taking a moment to send Liam a text about her plan. As she walked, Anya decided to cut through a series of alleyways that would shorten her route to the market. The narrow passages were nearly empty in the late morning, the buildings on either side casting cool shadows. She was about halfway through when movement ahead caught her attention. From a distance, she saw a young man in bright yellow shoes and a black hoodie, talking with a blonde woman wearing minimal clothing despite the daytime hour. 2 men in black sunglasses and leather jackets stood nearby, their stances suggesting they were involved in the conversation. Anya slowed her pace, something about the young man's posture striking her as familiar, though his back was to her. She couldn't see his face, but something about those yellow shoes tugged at her memory. The exchange between them looked like some kind of transaction, money or small packages changing hands. She couldn't be sure from this distance. Suddenly, one of the men in leather jackets noticed her watching. He nudged his companion, and both men turned to stare at her. "What are you looking at, lady?" one of them shouted, his tone unmistakably threatening. Anya immediately turned around, her heart racing as she quickened her steps back toward the main street. Her instinct was to call the law enforcement, but what would she say? She hadn't gotten a clear view of what they were doing, and nobody seemed to be in immediate danger. After everything that had happened with Alan the night before, she didn't think she had the emotional energy to deal with this potential threat to herself and Liam. As she emerged onto the busy main street, Anya tried to calm her nerves. Those yellow shoes kept nagging at her mind. Where had she seen them before? She couldn't place it, but the feeling of familiarity was unmistakable. Her appetite for shopping now gone, Anya pulled out her phone and texted Liam directly. "Would you like to have lunch together today? I have some free time before my shift." She waited for a reply, but none came immediately. Sighing, Anya decided to head home. Perhaps she could use this unexpected time to catch up on some chores or rest before her clinic shift. The house was quiet when Anya returned. Heading upstairs to the master bedroom, Anya opened the windows to air out the lingering smell of alcohol. The room needed a thorough cleaning, and she decided to start by changing the bedding. The king-sized bed had been a wedding gift from a wealthy friend 15 years ago, an extravagant piece of furniture that seemed almost out of place in their modest home. Anya stripped off the sheets and comforter, then tried to move the heavy mattress to better reach the fitted sheet. As she pushed against it, straining with the effort, she placed one leg on the underbed to give herself more leverage. That's when she noticed something odd. A section in the middle of the underbed looked different from the rest of the fabric. Looking closer, she could see what appeared to be a seam, where the material had been cut and then sewn back together. "What in the world?" she murmured, running her fingers along the uneven stitching. Curiosity overcoming her, Anya went to her sewing kit and retrieved a small pair of scissors. She knew she might be ruining an expensive piece of furniture, but something compelled her to investigate. Carefully, she cut along the line of stitches, pulling back the fabric to reveal the cotton stuffing inside. As she dug through the fluffy material, her fingers brushed against something smooth and flat. Pulling back more cotton, she discovered several photographs hidden within the underbed. With trembling hands, she extracted them one by one. The photos were from the family vacation in Morocco 10 years ago, the trip from which Nadia never returned. One photograph in particular caught her attention. Alan crouched on one knee on a sandy beach, Liam on his right and Nadia on his left. Both children were smiling. Anya turned the photo over and felt her breath catch. Written on the back was what appeared to be a set of coordinates. She quickly looked through the other photos, which showed various tourist sites around Morocco. On the back of a photo taken in the desert was what looked like a phone number, not a US format, likely a Moroccan number. Her heart pounding, Anya took pictures of the damaged underbed with her phone, documenting the hiding place. Then she hastily changed the bed cover and pushed the heavy bed back into position. She didn't bother to sew the underbed back together, deciding she would deal with it later. Taking the photographs to the desk, Anya's mind raced with questions. Why had Alan hidden these photos? What significance did these coordinates and phone number hold? She picked up her phone and called Inspector Davies, who had handled Nadia's case, but the call went straight to voicemail. She checked her messages and saw that Liam had finally replied, saying he would wait for her at the convenience store in an hour during his lunch break. Anya quickly texted back, "Something's come up. I found a clue, but I'll see you there and tell you about it later." Turning to her laptop, Anya typed the coordinates from the back of the beach photo into a search engine. The results showed a location in the center of Sana Island, off the coast of Marrakesh, Morocco. She compared the sandy beach in the photos to images of Sana Island beaches online. They matched perfectly. Why would he mark this specific location? She whispered to herself. Was this just to remember where the photo was taken, or is this where Nadia is? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She looked at the phone number on the other photo, debating whether to call it. Curiosity won out, and with shaking fingers, she dialed the international number. The line rang 3 times before a man answered. The voice spoke in heavily accented English. "Yes, who is this?" Shock ran through Anya, and she instantly ended the call, nearly dropping her phone in the process. She searched the number online, but found no useful information. "What are you hiding, Alan?" she whispered, staring at the photos spread before her. With Inspector Davies not answering her call, Anya decided she needed to take these potential pieces of evidence to the authorities herself. She carefully gathered the photographs, placed them in her handbag, and headed downstairs, her mind spinning with possibilities. As she reached for the front door, Anya paused, looking at the time. She should still have time to show these to the officers, and then meet Liam for lunch before her clinic shift. Anya walked briskly toward the station, the weight of the photographs in her bag, feeling far heavier than their physical presence. Her mind churned with questions and half-formed theories, each more unsettling than the last dot. About 15 minutes into her journey, she passed the Dusty Chalice, a bar Alan often visited. As if conjured by her thoughts, the door swung open, and Alan himself stepped out, his face tense. He froze when he saw her, genuine surprise in his reddened eyes. "Anya, what are you doing here?" he asked, glancing around cautiously. "Thought you'd be at home getting ready for work." Anya's mouth went dry. She hadn't prepared for this encounter. Her hand instinctively tightened on her bag, acutely aware of its contents. I'm going to visit Liam," she said, avoiding his gaze. "We planned lunch together." Alan narrowed his eyes, studying her. "Oh yeah, you sure about that?" His tone carried an edge that made the hair on her neck rise. "Yes," she said firmly. "I didn't get a chance to talk to Liam this morning, so I thought I'd surprise him." Alan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I was just on my way home. Why don't we have lunch together instead? Just the two of us. We can order food and eat before your shift. I can't, Anya replied, stepping back. Not after last night. I promised Liam. He's waiting for me. Before she could finish, Alan grabbed her arm tightly. Liam will understand, he said, his voice low and firm. Come with me, Anya. There was no choice in his tone. Panic stirred inside her as Alan guided her back toward their house, his grip firm. She considered calling out, but what could she say? That her husband wanted her to come home. It would sound absurd, and the last thing she needed was public drama that might reveal the photographs. As if reading her mind, Alan leaned closer. Don't make this harder. Not here. They walked in silence, Alan's hand never leaving her arm. Once home, he unlocked the door and ushered her inside before locking it. Alan, what's going on? Anya demanded, rubbing her arm. Why did you lock the door? I need to meet Liam. Instead of answering, Alan yanked her handbag away and spilled its contents onto the floor. Her wallet, keys, phone and the photographs. He picked them up slowly, flipping through them with eerie calmness before letting out a dry laugh. So you found these, he said softly. Anya backed away. I found them under the bed. How do you know? And what's with the coordinates? The number. On the back, Alan's smile was chilling. You already figured it out, didn't you? Sana Island. Someone I trust there just told me a US number called him. It was yours. That's how I know you saw the photos. And I'm guessing you weren't going to Liam, you were going to the station. If you were meeting Liam, you would have taken the bus. Anya's chest tightened as Alan moved closer. Why hide them? What happened to Nadia? She pressed, desperate. To keep him talking. Alan's hand shot out, clamping around her throat. Anya's eyes widened, her breath cut off. She clawed at his hand, gasping. Please, she whispered. We still have a son. His expression remained cold. Anya's vision blurred, as she struggled for Erin, till her phone suddenly rang on the floor. The sound startled Alan, and his grip loosened. She collapsed, coughing, but Alan quickly snatched the phone and ended the call. No police, no Liam, no one, he growled. Before she could react, Alan bound her wrists with a zip tie, gagged her, and forced her into the back of their old car. Won't let you hand over those photos, he muttered. The drive blurred by, familiar streets fading into unknown ones. Finally, Alan parked behind a rundown building with a glowing sign that read the last call. The name alone chilled her. Alan turned, eyes flat and emotionless. We're going inside, he said. If you try anything, I'll tell them you're unstable. Who do you think they'll believe? Me or you? The cruelty in his voice broke her last illusion. Maybe the man she once defended had never existed at all. Deal with her quick and no mess. Anya's eyes widened as understanding crashed over her. This wasn't just about preventing her from going to the law enforcement. Alan intended for her to disappear permanently. She tried to scream through the gag, the sound emerging as a muffled whimper that drew no attention from the other patrons. The tattooed man took hold of her arm, his grip surprisingly gentle compared to Alan's bruising force. His fingertips were calloused, his palms warm and dry against her clammy skin. Take her to the back, called a heavy-set man from behind the bar, his focus never leaving the glass he was polishing with a dingy rag. As the tattooed man guided her away, Anya twisted her head back, desperate for one last look at Alan. She saw another man approach him, leaning in close to ask, "You want the usual girl?" Alan's response floated clearly across the room, his voice lighter now that the burden of her presence was being removed. "Yes, with something to take my mind off all this." He reached into his jacket, producing a thick envelope that he handed to the bartender with practiced ease. The man peered inside, whistling low at the contents before tucking it beneath the counter. "What a good use of your wife's money," the man laughed. "You sure you want to get rid of her? You're losing your ATM. Don't ask, just do it," Alan snapped, already turning toward a doorway on the opposite side of the room where a young blonde woman in a tight dress waited, her expression vacant. The tattooed man guided Anya down a narrow hallway to a small windowless room containing only a metal chair and a cabinet. He pushed her into the chair and secured her legs with more zip ties, working quickly and efficiently. Despite her terror, Anya studied his face carefully, determined that if by some miracle she survived this, she would be able to identify him to the law enforcement. As he straightened to his full height, recognition struck her like lightning. This was one of the men in leather jackets she had seen earlier that day in the alley, during her shortcut to the market. But who was the man wearing the bright yellow shoes? Certainly not Alan. Once she was securely bound to the chair, the man straightened and looked directly into her eyes for the first time. What she saw there confused her. Not the cold detachment of a killer for hire, but something softer, almost apologetic. His expression changed, the hardness melting from his features, as he pressed a finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. From his pocket, he withdrew a smartphone. Its screen cracked at one corner, but the display still bright in the dim room. After tapping the screen several times, he turned it to show her. On the display was a banking app showing a transaction. Record with an amount that made Anya's eyes widen in shock. Easily 5 figures, more money than she could save in a year of double shifts. But it was the name on the transaction that truly stole her breath. Liam Croft, her son. He had paid this man. The pieces started falling into place, forming a picture she didn't want to believe. The bright yellow shoes, of course, they were Liam's. That's why they had felt so familiar. As the realization settled over her like a leaden blanket, Anya felt tears welling in her eyes, not for herself, but for her son. What had Alan done to drive Liam to such desperate measures? And what would become of her boy if this plan succeeded? The tattooed man switched off his phone, sliding it back into his pocket. He moved the cabinet against the wall, his movements deliberate as he extracted a key from around his neck and unlocked the metal doors. Inside, mounted on hooks and organized with military precision, was an arsenal that made Anya's blood run cold. Handguns of various calibers, boxes of ammunition stacked neatly, what appeared to be a disassembled rifle on the bottom shelf. The man selected a revolver, its blue-black finish absorbing what little light reached it. With practiced movements, he opened the cylinder, showing Anya that it contained a single bullet. He spun the cylinder, the metallic clicks echoing in the small room like a macabre countdown. "1 bullet," he said quietly. "For your husband from Liam." Anya shook her head frantically, making muffled sounds of protest behind her gag. Her eyes pleaded with the man, trying to communicate what her voice couldn't. "Don't do this. Not in my son's name." Before the man could respond, the door opened. Liam stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He wore jeans and a hoodie, and on his feet were the bright yellow shoes Anya had glimpsed in the alley earlier that day. "Mom," he breathed, his voice cracking on the single syllable. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees beside the chair. His fingers, trembling slightly, worked at the knot of the gag. The cloth fell away, and Anya gasped as fresh air touched her dry mouth. "I'm so sorry they had to restrain you like this," Liam said, not meeting her eyes as he began working on the zip ties binding her wrists. "It's just to make sure you wouldn't fight back and ruin the plan. I didn't want that, but Marcus insisted it was necessary." The tattooed man, Marcus apparently, gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. "I'm also sorry for what I'm about to do," Liam continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. But I can't let him hurt you again. If he brought you here, that means only one thing. He wanted to get rid of you permanently. As blood rushed painfully back into her freed hands, Anya grabbed Liam's arm. No, she said harassingly. Liam, listen to me. If the law enforcement find out about this, they'll put you in prison. You can't do this. Liam's face hardened. I don't care. After everything Dad did, I just want him gone. What do you mean? Anya searched her son's face. Liam, what are you talking about? The truth is too painful, Mom, Liam whispered, his eyes haunted. Marcus, who had been standing by silently, his presence almost forgotten in the intensity of the moment between mother and son, stepped forward. Your dad's upstairs with that woman, he said, his voice low and urgent. Now's the right time if we're going to do this. Liam nodded, rising to his feet with the fluid grace of youth. He reached for the gun in Marcus's hand, his expression set with terrible determination. In that moment, time seemed to slow for Anya. She saw her son, her beautiful, sensitive boy, who had once refused to step on ants and had cried when his sister's tooth fell out, reaching for a weapon with the intention of becoming a killer. In his face, she saw not just hatred for his father, but a lifetime of pain she had somehow failed to protect him from. The realization galvanized her. Moving faster than either man anticipated, Anya lunged toward Liam, her muscles protesting after their confinement. Her fingers closed around his phone, which was protruding slightly from his hoodie pocket. Mom, what? Liam began, but Anya had already pressed the SOS button, the one they had configured years ago after Nadia's disappearance. A feature that automatically dialed emergency services and sent the phone's location to them. No, Liam shouted, trying to grab the phone back. The device began its connection sequence, a female voice announcing, "Emergency services have been contacted. Please stay on the line." The tattooed man cursed loudly. "Deal's off," he declared, quickly unloading the gun and shoving it back into the cabinet. "I don't do murder with cops on the way." He gestured to someone outside the door, and within seconds he and his men were rushing out of the building. Liam stared at Anya, his expression a mixture of anger and devastation. "Why did you do that? He was going to pay. I wanted to end this." Anya held her son's face between her hands. "I can't let you become a criminal, Liam. I've already lost one child. I can't lose you too." Liam's eyes welled with tears, the tough facade crumbling to reveal the wounded boy beneath. "But as long as he's alive, we'll never be safe. You'll never be safe. I saw what he did to you last night. I've seen what he's capable of for years." "Listen to me," Anya said urgently, hearing sirens in the distance. "This stays between us. We tell the law enforcement we caught your father here using drugs. I'll show them the evidence I found, and you'll tell them everything that happened in Morocco, but you never paid anyone to harm your father. Do you understand me?" Liam hesitated, conflict evident in his eyes. "But what if he tells them? What if those men talk?" "They won't," Anya said, with more confidence than she felt. "They're long gone, and Marcus doesn't seem the type to confess to conspiracy charges." She squeezed his hands. "And who would believe Alan over us? He's been threatening and abusing us for years." Liam nodded slowly, looking suddenly young and vulnerable. "Okay," he whispered. "Good. Now, help me clean this place. We need to wipe down everything you and I touched." Together, they quickly ran their sleeves over the chair, doorknob, and cabinet handles, anywhere fingerprints might have been left. As the sirens grew louder, Anya studied her son's profile, seeing both the child he had been and the man he was becoming. Despite everything, she felt a surge of fierce pride, not for the plan he had conceived, but for the love that had driven it. Liam had been willing to sacrifice his freedom, his future, perhaps even his soul to protect her. Law enforcement cars screeched to a halt outside the building, their lights casting red and blue shadows through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. "Remember," she whispered, "you were trying to save me, nothing more." Anya and Liam stepped out of the pub just as law enforcement cars pulled up, their lights flashing against the building's grimy exterior. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, approaching cautiously. "My husband is inside," Anya called out, raising her hands to show she wasn't a threat. "Upstairs, he brought me here against my will." The officers approached, one of them holstering his weapon to speak with them, while the others entered the building. "Ma'am, we received an emergency call from this location. Can you tell me what happened?" Anya nodded, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "My name is Anya Croft. My husband, Alan Croft, abducted me from our home and brought me here. I believe he intended to have me killed." As she spoke, more officers emerged from the building, escorting Alan and a scantily clad woman. Alan's face contorted with rage when he saw Anya and Liam standing with the law enforcement. "This is a setup," he shouted, struggling against the officer's grip. "They're lying. Whatever they told you is a lie." The officer interviewing Anya ignored Alan's outburst. "We'll need both of you to come to the station to give formal statements," he said. Anya reached into her pocket, producing the photographs she had managed to grab before being forced from the house. "Officer, I found these hidden in our home today. They're from our family vacation in Morocco 10 years ago, the trip where my daughter disappeared." The officer examined the photos, noting the coordinates and phone number written on the backs. "We'll take these as evidence," he said, placing them in an evidence bag. Liam stepped forward. "I was there," he said, his voice unexpectedly firm. "I was 10 years old when my father murdered my sister. He's been threatening and abusing me ever since to keep me quiet." Without warning, Liam lifted his shirt, revealing a pattern of old scars across his back, evidence of systematic abuse that made Anya gasp in horror. She had never seen these marks before. Liam had always been careful to change privately, even at home. "Oh, Liam," she whispered, reaching for him. As Alan was being placed in a law enforcement car, he locked eyes with Liam. "You think you're smarter than me?" he called out. "No, I'll make sure you end up behind bars too." His gaze shifted to Anya. "This is a war zone now, and I'll defeat all my enemies." He spat toward them before being forced into the car, his final act of defiance making Anya flinch. She watched as the man she had married, the father of her children, transformed before her eyes into someone unrecognizable, a monster who had been hiding in plain sight for years. At the law enforcement station, Alan and the woman were processed through booking while Anya and Liam were taken to separate interview rooms. Inspector Davies, who had worked Nadia's case from the beginning, joined Anya with a folder of notes. "Mrs. Croft," he said, his expression grave, "I apologize for missing your call earlier. Tell me everything that happened today." Anya recounted, finding the photographs, the coordinates to Sana Island, and the phone number she believed belonged to someone Alan had paid to cover up Nadia's death. She described Alan's violent reaction when he discovered she had found the photos, his abduction of her and bringing her to the pub. "I believe he killed her based on what he implied in Liam's statement," she concluded, her voice breaking. "I think Nadia is buried somewhere on that island, and Alan paid someone to protect that secret." Inspector Davies nodded solemnly. "We'll coordinate with Moroccan authorities immediately. That phone number may lead us to whoever helped your husband." He paused, studying her face. "What I need to understand is how you ended up at that pub, and if your husband had paid those men to kill you, why hadn't they done so before we arrived? And how did your son know where to find you?" Anya carefully explained her version of events, leaving out Liam's involvement with the men. "Liam and I were supposed to have lunch together. He called me during my struggle with Alan. but the call ended abruptly. He must have suspected I was in danger. We have a family tracker app on our phones that we installed years ago when Nadia disappeared. We rarely use it now, but it was still active. Inspector Davies frowned, making notes. Something still doesn't add up, Mrs. Croft. I need you to tell me the whole truth. Before Anya could respond, there was a knock at the door. Another detective entered, his expression serious. Liam Croft has confessed everything, he announced. He claims he knew his father had paid those men for prostitutes, and potentially to kill his mother if she discovered the truth about what happened 10 years ago. The detective continued, according to your son, he paid those men a higher price than his father without Alan's knowledge. He asked them to kill Alan while he was with the woman because he didn't want him to hurt you anymore. He said he'd already lost his sister and couldn't bear to lose his mother, too. Anya's hands flew to her mouth. No. He also said you stopped him because you didn't want him to become a murderer. The men apparently got away before we arrived. Tears streamed down Anya's face as she realized Liam had chosen to tell the complete truth, not protecting himself as she had instructed. Liam also told us what happened 10 years ago, the detective added. According to him, your husband had been abusing both children for years. The abuse continued until today. Alan never took the medications prescribed for his PTSD and was drinking heavily, which you partially knew about, but you were working most of the time and weren't home much. You trusted him and never suspected the extent of the abuse. Anya nodded, wiping away tears. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. Your son claims that on the day Nadia disappeared, Alan had been drinking at a hotel bar. He returned to their room, took Nadia with him, and when he came back later that night, Nadia was gone. He threatened Liam, saying if he ever told anyone, he would hurt both Liam and you. Inspector Davies reached across the table, his voice gentle. We'll coordinate with Moroccan authorities to find the man Alan paid. That person is likely the key to finding out what happened to Nadia. Whatever happened to her, Anya whispered. I just hope her soul is at peace now, and that Alan will receive the punishment he deserves. She looked up, her eyes red, rimmed, but determined. What about my son? What will happen to him? He'll be charged with conspiracy to commit murder, Inspector, Davies said frankly. But given the circumstances, the court might show leniency. The fact that he stopped short of actually committing the crime will work in his favor. Anya straightened, finding a new reserve of strength. I've lived a bitter life for the past decade, she said, but I'll plead with the judge for my son. He didn't go through with killing his father. He chose to be better, despite everything he's endured. Inspector Davies nodded. That's fair. I hope justice will be served for all of you. He stood. For now, we'll continue the investigation. Please wait outside while we process everything. Anya walked into the corridor, emotionally exhausted. Through a doorway, she saw Liam being processed by an officer, his hands cuffed in front of him. Their eyes met across the room, hers filled with sorrow, his with a strange sort of peace, as if a terrible burden had finally been lifted. When the booking process was complete, an officer allowed Anya a brief moment with her son before they took him to a holding cell. I'm so sorry, Mum, Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. Anya touched his face gently. Thank you for saving my life, she said. If you hadn't intervened, we'd all just be counting days until we ended up in the graves Alan had prepared for us. I couldn't let him hurt you anymore, Liam said simply. Listen to me, Anya said firmly. You didn't kill your father. You're not a murderer. And whatever he or anyone else says against you in court, I will believe you and testify for you. We're going to get through this, Liam, together. As the officer led Liam away, Anya watched her son straight back and raised head. Despite everything, they had endured Nadia's disappearance, Alan's abuse, and the crushing weight of secrets. they had survived. The truth, painful as it was, had finally come to light. For the first time in 10 years, Anya felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope, not the desperate hope of finding Nadia alive, but the quiet, steady hope that justice would prevail, that evil would be punished, and that she and Liam might eventually find peace. Whatever lay ahead, trials, investigations, painful revelations, they would face it together. The long night of secrecy and suffering was finally giving way to the first pale light of truth. Story. To a young mother and her 6-month-old baby vanished from Cypress Swamp Reserve, sparking a frantic search operation. When teens found nothing, investigators were left with the grim conclusion that they had been lost to the swamp's apex predators. The case remained frozen for a year, an official record with no final entry. That entry was finally written when hunters captured a python with a stomach so unnaturally swollen it defied belief. And the truth it contained was more horrific than any alligator attack. The asphalt parking lot near the entrance of Cypress Swamp Reserve still radiated the stored heat of the day, even as the Georgia sun dipped below the sawgrass horizon. It was Sunday, August 22nd, 2018. Ilara Caldwell leaned against the hood of her car, the metal warm beneath her palms. The air, thick and humid, was alive with the rising chorus of cicadas and the distant guttural bellows of alligators beginning their nightly routines. She checked her phone again. 9:30 p.m. The screen illuminated her face, highlighting the deepening lines of concern around her eyes. Her daughter, 28-year-old Serafina Kalin, and her 6-month-old grandson, Kieran, were supposed to have met her here over an hour ago. The sprawling parking area, which had been bustling with tourists, families, and airboat operators just hours earlier, was now almost desolate. A few National Reserve Service Ranger vehicles were parked near the entrance station, but otherwise, Ilara was alone. She dialed Seraphine's number for the 6th time in 30 minutes. It went straight to voicemail. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, distinct from the oppressive humidity clinging to her skin. Serafina was reliable. She was structured, meticulous in her planning, especially when it concerned Kieran. She wouldn't simply forget the pickup time or let her phone battery die without warning. Ilara scrolled through her photos, her thumb hovering over the image she had taken that very morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. Serafina had been so vibrant, standing right next to the large grey boulder supporting the official Cypress Swamp Reserve sign. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress, patterned with green flowers, a wide-brimmed straw sun hat protecting her fair skin from the harsh sun. Dark sunglasses obscured her eyes, but her smile was wide and genuine, strapped securely to her chest. In a soft greyish-blue fabric carrier was Kieran, beaming a wide, toothless grin at his grandmother. It was the picture of a perfect day out. Now, as the last vestiges of twilight faded and the encroaching darkness seemed to amplify the wild sounds of the swamp, the image felt haunting. Ilara pushed herself off the car and walked quickly toward the ranger station, the gravel crunching under her feet. Inside, the air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the heavy heat outside. She found a National Reserve Service Ranger, Officer Jennings, finalizing the day's logs. Ilara explained the situation, her voice trembling slightly as she relayed the details. Serafina, 28, Kieran, 6 months. They were supposed to be hiking the accessible trails, nothing strenuous. They had planned to spend the entire day, a much-needed escape from the pressures of Seraphine's life. As the ranger began, making the necessary calls, the context of Seraphine's situation came into focus. She was a widow. Her husband had died unexpectedly, less than a year prior, leaving Serafina to navigate new motherhood alone and financially precarious. The life insurance payout had been meager, forcing Serafina back into part-time nursing shifts sooner than she had anticipated. She was exhausted, juggling the demands of the hospital and the sleepless nights of an infant. But she was fiercely independent. She rarely accepted financial help from Alara, determined to provide for Kieran herself. This trip to the Cypress Swamp Reserve was meant to be a reset, a breath of fresh air after a grueling week. Alara had dropped them off at 11 a.m. Serafina had insisted on exploring alone. She wanted the quiet time with her son. They had packed enough supplies, water, snacks, diapers, a small first aid kit. Serafina respected the wilderness. She wasn't reckless. Officer Jennings' demeanor shifted from polite concern to urgent professionalism. The Cypress Swamp Reserve was not merely a park. It was a vast, unforgiving wilderness spanning 1.5 million acres of wetlands. The dangers were numerous: dehydration, disorientation, alligators, venomous snakes. A lone woman with an infant was incredibly vulnerable. By 11 p.m., the entrance area was illuminated by the flashing lights of the local constabulary. An official missing persons report was filed. As the oppressive darkness of the Georgia night settled over the swamp, the search for Serafina and Kieran Callan began. The urgency was palpable. Every hour that passed decreased the chances of a positive outcome. The wilderness that had promised a day of peace now held the terrifying unknown. Dawn broke over the Cypress Swamp Reserve on Monday morning, the rising sun cutting through the thick, humid air, promising another day of brutal heat. The search operation mobilized overnight was massive in scale. The disappearance of a mother and infant triggered a multi-agency response that transformed the park entrance into a bustling, organized command center. Local constabulary, the Georgia Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, GFWC, and National Reserve Service Rangers coordinated their efforts. The air thick with the sound of radio chatter, the roar of airboat engines, and the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades. The initial strategy was straightforward. Focus on the areas Serafina was most likely to have visited. Alara Caldwell, pale and sleepless, provided investigators with Seraphine's intended route. She planned to stick to the well-maintained boardwalk, trails near the main entrance. These were popular areas, heavily trafficked by tourists. It seemed impossible that someone could vanish from there without being seen, without leaving a trace. Airboats were deployed to scan the waterways in the vast fields of sawgrass, their massive fans roaring as they skimmed the surface of the shallow water. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging equipment flew low grids over the dense hammocks of trees, their sensors searching for any sign of human presence beneath the canopy. On the ground, teams of rangers, police officers, and experienced volunteers began walking the trails. Calling Seraphine's name, their voices swallowed by the immense landscape. The K9 units brought in to track Seraphine's scent from the parking lot struggled with the overwhelming sensory input of the swamp and the sheer number of people who had passed through the area over the weekend. While the physical search ramped up, detectives began the routine background investigation into Serafina Callan's life. They needed to understand who she was, and if there was any underlying reason she might have chosen to disappear, or if someone might have had a motive to harm her. The picture that emerged was one of quiet resilience and heartbreaking normalcy. Serafina was a dedicated mother, universally liked by her colleagues at the hospital. Her financial struggles were evident in her bank statements. The strain of managing on a single part-time income was clear, but she was managing. There were no signs of depression, no secret relationships, no significant debts to dangerous individuals, no enemies. She was simply a young widow trying to build a life for her son. The technical aspect of the investigation yielded little more than confirmation of the timeline. Seraphine's cell phone records were pulled. Her phone had last pinged a tower near the park entrance shortly after dropped her off on Sunday morning. After that, the digital trail vanished. It suggested the phone was either turned off destroyed, or had moved out of range deep within the park very early in the day. The first 48 hours were critical, and the search teams pushed themselves to the limit. They found the detritus of tourism, stray water bottles, discarded wrappers, even a lost child's shoe, but nothing belonging to Serafina or Kieran. The heat was relentless, the humidity oppressive. The searchers battled dehydration and exhaustion, driven by the urgency of finding the missing mother and baby. It was on the fourth day of the search, Wednesday, August 25th, that the operation encountered an unexpected and significant obstacle, one that would fundamentally alter the course of the immediate efforts. The command center was preparing to expand the search grid into the less popular, more rugged trails and service access roads that spiderweb deeper into the park. These were areas Serafina was less likely to have gone, but with the primary trails yielding nothing, they had to be checked. It was the logical next step in a comprehensive search pattern. Detective Julian Hayes, a seasoned officer serving as the local constabulary liaison for the interagency coordination, arrived at the command briefing with urgent news. Hayes was known for his pragmatic, sometimes bureaucratic approach to police work. He addressed the search coordinators with a tone of serious concern. He informed them that a significant section of the planned expansion area, specifically several key access roads and the surrounding trails, was indefinitely closed, effective immediately. The reason, Hayes explained, was an environmental hazard. According to an incident report filed late Tuesday night, a private land management firm working on adjacent land bordering the park had experienced a catastrophic equipment failure during a routine pesticide application. This failure resulted in the accidental overspray of a potent restricted chemical into the park boundaries. The chemical, he detailed, citing the report, was dangerous if inhaled or touched before it degraded. The implications were immediate and devastating for the search effort. The contamination zone encompassed a large area directly adjacent to where Serafina might have wandered if she had become disoriented or sought a less crowded path. Due to the environmental hazard, ground teams and canine units were strictly forbidden from entering the zone. The risk of exposure to the searchers, Hayes emphasized, citing state and federal environmental regulations, was too great. The liability for the agencies involved was immense. The decision caused immediate frustration among the experienced National Reserve Service Rangers and volunteer search leaders. They argued that they had specialized equipment to handle hazardous materials, that the risk was worth taking given the vulnerability of the missing infant, who had now been exposed to the elements for 3 days. They pleaded for a waiver, for a compromise that would allow them to search the area safely. But Detective Hayes was adamant. The regulations were clear. The zone was closed until environmental specialists could assess the risk and clear the area. A process that could take days, perhaps even a week. Furthermore, Hayes emphasized the inherent dangers of the deep swamp, the areas far beyond the contamination zone. He suggested that Serafina, perhaps seeking shade or becoming disoriented, had likely wandered much farther off the main paths than anyone initially believed. He pointed to the vast, inaccessible wilderness to the west, suggesting that was the most probable location given the lack of evidence in the accessible areas. The search was effectively diverted. Resources were poured into the deep swamp areas that required airboats and specialized equipment, areas where the chances of survival were slim. The air search continued over the contamination zone, but the dense canopy of cypress and mangrove trees made thermal imaging difficult and visual spotting nearly impossible. The most critical tool, meticulous ground searching, had been removed from a key area of interest. The days turned into 3 weeks. The media attention, initially intense, began to wane as the story stalled. The command center grew quieter. The army of volunteers dwindled. Despite the massive effort involving hundreds of personnel and thousands of manure, not a single trace of Serafina or Kieran had been found. No diaper bag, no shred of the yellow dress, no baby carrier. It was as if they had simply evaporated into the humid air. Alara Caldwell refused to accept the narrative that was forming. She knew Serafina. She would not have wandered recklessly into the deep swamp with her baby. The complete lack of any physical evidence felt wrong. It wasn't just that they hadn't found Serafina and Kieran. It was that they hadn't found anything. After 3 weeks, the active search was officially scaled back. The resources were needed elsewhere. The prevailing theory, the one documented in the reports and supported by the assessments presented during the briefings, was a tragic accident. Serafina and Kieran had succumbed to the elements or wildlife deep within the Cypress Swamp Reserve. Their remains, investigators believed, were likely scattered by scavengers, or submerged in the murky waters lost forever to the swamp. Ilara protested, begging the authorities to keep looking, particularly in the areas they hadn't thoroughly searched on foot due to the contamination zone restrictions. But the investigation had hit a wall. The case files were organized, the reports finalized, and the disappearance of Serafina and Kieran Callan began its slow descent into the archives of cold cases. A year passed. The silence from the Cypress Swamp Reserve remained absolute. The case of Serafina and Kieran Callan had gone completely cold. The initial flurry of activity, the massive search, the media attention, it had all faded, leaving behind only the agonizing absence. For Alara Caldwell, the year had been a blur of grief and frustration. She never accepted the official conclusion that her daughter and grandson were simply lost to the swamp. She continued to press the authorities, hired private investigators, and distributed flyers, but every lead led to a dead end. The lack of any physical evidence remained a central baffling mystery. The Cypress Swamp Reserve, meanwhile, continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to the human tragedy that had unfolded within its boundaries. But the ecosystem was under siege. An invasive species, the Burmese python, had established a destructive foothold, decimating local wildlife populations. In response, the state of Georgia had authorized programs encouraging hobbyist hunters to track and remove these giant snakes, offering bounties and organizing hunts to curb the population explosion. It was August 2019. Holden Miller and Ronan Ellis, 2 experienced python hunters, were deep in a remote, grassy expanse of the Cypress Swamp Reserve, miles from the nearest road or tourist trail. They had been out since dawn, navigating the difficult terrain in their customized swamp buggy, scanning the dense vegetation for the distinctive pattern of a python skin. The area was known for large snakes, and the conditions were perfect. Hot, humid, the air still after a recent rain. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast field of tall, dry grass that took on a strange, almost pinkish-purple hue under the overcast sky. Late in the afternoon, as the light began to flatten, Ronan spotted it. Resting on a large, flat grey rock, partially obscured by the tall grass, was a massive Burmese python. It was easily one of the largest they had ever encountered, likely exceeding 16 feet in length. But it wasn't the length that immediately drew their attention. It was the girth. The snake was coiled, resting passively, its thick, muscular body covered in the distinctive interlocking patches of dark brown and black over a dull tan base. In the center of its body was a massive, elongated bulge. The shape was pronounced unnatural. The snake's skin was stretched tautly over the obstruction, clearly indicating it had recently consumed a very large meal. Holden slowed the buggy to a crawl, cutting the engine. The 2 men watched the snake for a moment, the silence broken only by the buzzing of insects. In the Cypress Swamp Reserve, a bulge that size usually meant one thing: a large deer, a hog, or perhaps a sizable alligator. It was a significant capture both for the bounty program and for the removal of such a large predator from the ecosystem. They moved quickly, efficiently. Ronan raised his specialized shotgun loaded with heavy shot designed for dispatching large reptiles. He fired a single shot, killing the snake instantly. They approached the carcass, the sheer scale of the snake. Even more impressive, up close. The bulge was immense, solid, stretching the snake's body to an unnatural dimension. They estimated the snake with its meal weighed well over 200 pounds. It took both men considerable effort, straining against the dead weight, to haul the massive carcass onto the back of the swamp buggy. They secured it with heavy straps and began the long, jarring ride back to civilization. Their destination was an official GFWC check-in station where the snake would be measured, weighed, and documented as part of the python removal program. The sun was setting as they arrived at the station, a small outpost equipped for processing the hunter's catches. The GFWC officer on duty, a young biologist named Officer Thompson, was impressed by the size of the python. He helped them unload the carcass onto a large stainless steel necropsy table. The official measurements were taken 16 feet for the weight 218 pounds. As Officer Thompson recorded the data, Holden and Ronan's curiosity got the better of them. It was standard practice to examine the stomach contents of the pythons. It provided valuable data on the snake's diet and its impact on the ecosystem. Given the size of the bulge, they were eager to see what it had consumed. They were convinced. It was a mature white-tailed deer. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed, illuminating the scene. Holden took a large, sharp bone knife and prepared to make the incision. The atmosphere was casual, the men joking about the size of the antlers they might find. Holden pierced the taut skin of the snake's belly, making a long, clean cut along the length of the bulge. The hide was thick, requiring significant pressure to cut through. As the stomach cavity opened, the smell was immediate and overpowering. The distinct odor of advanced decomposition and the musky, acidic scent of the snake's digestive fluids. It was stronger than usual, more pungent, but not entirely unexpected given the size of the meal. They peeled back the layers of skin and muscle tissue. The stomach lining was stretched thin, translucent in places. Holden made the final incision, opening the stomach itself. At first, the contents were difficult to discern, a compressed mass of partially digested tissue and bone. The digestive process of a python is powerful, breaking down even large animals relatively quickly. Ronan reached in wearing heavy rubber gloves, attempting to identify the prey. He pulled at something large, heavy, lodged in the center of the mass. Must be the hunch of the deer, Holden mumbled, leaning in closer. Ronan struggled with the weight, repositioning his grip. He pulled harder, and the object shifted, emerging from the grotesque mass. Then they saw it. It wasn't fur. It wasn't the hide of a deer. It was pale, smooth skin. Ronan recoiled, stumbling backward, his face draining of color. He gagged, the smell suddenly overwhelming. Holden froze, the knife still in his hand, staring at the contents of the snake's stomach. Exposed in the bright light of the check station was an entire human leg severed at the hip. The toes were visible, the skin slick and discolored, but undeniably human. The realization hit them all simultaneously. This wasn't an animal. The python had consumed a human. The experienced hunters, accustomed to the grim realities of the wilderness, were profoundly shaken. The casual atmosphere of the check-in station shattered. Officer Thompson, seeing the object, stepped closer to the table. He looked into the cavity, the horror registering instantly on his face. He immediately reached for his radio, his voice tight with urgency. "Dispatch, this is Cypress Swamp, Station 7. We have a situation. We need homicide detectives and the me out here immediately." we have human remains found inside a python. The check station, usually a place of routine data collection, was immediately transformed into a crime scene. The area was cordoned off. The investigators arrived quickly, the gravity of the situation evident in their demeanor. The necropsy continued under the direction of the medical examiner. The process was meticulous, gruesome. Inside the python's digestive tract, they recovered not only the leg, but other significant body parts, a partial torso, an arm. The remains were severely degraded by the snake's powerful digestive enzymes, but they were unmistakably human, and they appeared to belong to an adult. The discovery was shocking, unprecedented, even in the Cypress Swamp Reserve, a place often associated with strange and macabre occurrences. The immediate questions were overwhelming. Who was this person? How did they end up inside a Burmese python? The initial theories were speculative. While a large python could potentially kill an adult human, it was extremely rare. It seemed far more likely that the snake had scavenged the remains, but the remains were dismembered. Pythons do not tear their prey apart. This suggested that something else had happened to the body before the snake found it. Investigators considered the possibility of a murder, the Cypress Swamp Reserve being a notorious dumping ground for bodies. The remains were carefully collected and transported to the medical examiner's office for analysis. The priority was identification. DNA testing was the only option. The DNA profile was extracted from the recovered bone marrow and entered into the National Missing Persons Database, CODIS. Days later, the match came back. The remains found inside the 16-feet Burmese python belonged to Serafina Callan. The news hit Alara Caldwell like a physical blow. After a year of agonizing uncertainty, the fate of her daughter had been revealed in the most horrific way imaginable. The discovery confirmed Seraphine's death, but it offered no closure. Instead, it ripped the case wide open, plunging the investigation into a new realm of terrifying possibilities. And it raised a critical, agonizing question. Where was Kieran? The discovery of Serafina Callan's remains inside the Burmese python galvanized the investigation. The case, dormant for nearly a year, was immediately reopened, assigned to a specialized team of detectives from the Major Crimes Unit. The horrific nature of the discovery brought renewed media attention and immense pressure to find answers. But the confirmation of Seraphine's death only deepened the central mystery. Critically, within the python, amidst the partially digested remains of the adult female, there were no remains, no clothing fragments, no trace whatsoever of 6-month-old Kieran. The investigation faced a complex puzzle, a gruesome equation with too many unknown variables. How did Serafina die? How was her body dismembered? And what happened to the baby? The first priority was to understand the interaction between the python and the remains. The medical examiner, Dr. Anya Sharma, conducted a detailed analysis of the recovered body parts. The examination confirmed the initial assessment made at the scene. The python had scavenged the remains. It did not kill Serafina. There were no signs of constriction trauma, no crushed bones or widespread bruising consistent with a python attack. The dismemberment, the separation of the limbs from the torso, had occurred before the snake consumed the parts. This led to the prevailing hypothesis among the investigators, the scavenger theory. They hypothesized that Serafina had died in the park a year prior, perhaps from exposure or an accident, as initially believed. Her body, they speculated, had been dismembered by the true apex predator of the Cypress Swamp Reserve, the alligator. Alligators are known to tear their prey apart using a violent death roll, often stashing the parts underwater to decompose before consumption. The python, an opportunistic feeder, must have found these scavenged parts and consumed them. This theory seemed plausible, fitting the brutal realities of the Cypress Swamp Reserve ecosystem. It explained the dismemberment and the python's involvement. It provided a narrative that aligned with the initial assumption that Serafina had died in the park. However, there were significant inconsistencies that troubled the lead detectives. The location where the python was found was analyzed. It was deep within the park, remote, but it was primarily a grassy expanse, not the deep water habitats typically favored by large alligators for stashing prey. Furthermore, the trauma at the points of dismemberment, while severely degraded by the python's powerful digestive fluids, did not seem entirely consistent with the typical tearing action of an alligator attack. The edges of the bone, where discernible, seemed cleaner, more precise than expected from a death roll. Despite these inconsistencies, the scavenger theory remained the leading hypothesis. The alternative, that a human had dismembered the body, seemed too horrific to contemplate without further evidence. The investigation focused on trying to locate the rest of Seraphine's remains and any sign of Kieran. Search teams were redeployed to the area where the python was found, conducting meticulous grid searches, dredging nearby waterways, looking for any trace of the infant's clothing, the baby carrier, anything that might provide a clue as to what happened that day. The search yielded nothing. The swamp remained silent, offering no further clues. The mystery of Kieran's fate became the agonizing focus of the investigation. If Serafina had died in an accident, Kieran would have been with her. His remains should have been nearby. The absence of any trace suggested a terrifying alternative that someone else was involved in their disappearance, and that Kieran had been separated from his mother. It was at this point that the investigation brought in a specialist, Dr. Elias Croft, a forensic anthropologist renowned for his expertise in analyzing severely degraded remains and the taphonomy of decomposition, was consulted to conduct a detailed examination of the recovered tissue. Dr. Croft's task was to determine the timeline of events, the environment the body had been exposed to, and the nature of the dismemberment. The examination was conducted at the State Forensic Laboratory. The remains were carefully cleaned and prepared for analysis. Dr. Croft spent days meticulously examining the tissue, the bone structure, and the cellular degradation. He analyzed the patterns of digestion, the effects of the python's enzymes on the remains, comparing them to known samples of decomposition in the Cypress Swamp Reserve environment. He noted that the state of the remains, while degraded by the python, seemed inconsistent with a year of exposure in the humid, biologically active environment of the swamp. The tissue preservation was better than expected. This observation further weakened the scavenger theory. It was during the microscopic examination of the muscle tissue that Dr. Croft discovered the anomaly, a finding so unexpected that it would shatter the prevailing theories and alter the course of the investigation entirely. He was analyzing thin slices of the tissue under a high-powered microscope. Examining the cellular structure, he noticed a specific pattern of damage that was completely out of place. The cell walls were ruptured in a distinct way inconsistent with normal decomposition, freezing temperatures in the wild, or the effects of the python's digestive fluids. He recognized the pattern immediately, though he had rarely seen it in a forensic context involving remains found in a subtropical environment. It was the signature of ice crystal formation artifacts. When biological tissue is frozen, particularly when frozen rapidly and kept at a consistently low temperature, the water inside the cells expands, forming sharp ice crystals that puncture the cell membranes. When the tissue is subsequently thawed, the structural integrity of the cells is compromised, leaving behind these distinct microscopic markers. Dr. Croft conducted further tests, taking samples from multiple locations on the recovered remains. He confirmed his initial observation. The cellular damage was widespread, consistent throughout the tissue. The conclusion was unmistakable. Serafina Kalen's body had been frozen solid, likely in a commercial-grade freezer for an extended period. and subsequently thawed before being consumed by the python. The revelation was a forensic bombshell. It instantly invalidated the scavenger theory. Serafina had not died in the Cypress Swamp Reserve a year ago and decomposed naturally. The timeline of the investigation was completely wrong. The implications were staggering. Serafina Kalin was murdered. Her body was preserved, stored in a freezer for months, perhaps nearly the entire year since her disappearance. Then relatively recently, likely just days before the python found her, her body was removed from the freezer, dismembered, and disposed of in the Cypress Swamp Reserve. The discovery explained the inconsistencies in the scavenger theory, the relatively good preservation of the tissue, the clean cuts on the bone. It all pointed to human intervention. The dismemberment was not the work of alligators. It was done by human hands, likely to facilitate the disposal of the body and increase the chances of it being consumed by scavengers. The python's involvement was not the central element of the crime. It was a random, bizarre accident that revealed the crime. The investigation shifted dramatically. This was not a tragic accident. It was a complex, calculated homicide. The level of sophistication required to store a body for a year suggested a perpetrator with resources, planning, and a chilling lack of empathy. The discovery also gave terrifying weight to the possibility that Kieran had been abducted. If Serafina was murdered, the perpetrator would have had to deal with the infant. The absence of Kieran's remains suggested he might still be alive, taken by the person or persons responsible for his mother's death. The investigation now faced a new set of urgent questions. Who had the motive and the resources to commit such a heinous crime? Where was the freezer used to store Seraphine's body? And most importantly, where was Kieran? The case, once thought to be a tragic mystery of the swamp, now revealed a darkness far more calculated and sinister than anyone had imagined. The hunt for a killer and a missing child began in earnest. The revelation that Serafina Callan's body had been frozen for nearly a year transformed the investigation from a localized mystery into a sprawling, complex homicide case. The immediate challenge was the time gap. The crime had occurred a year prior, but the evidence had only just surfaced. The trail was cold, deliberately frozen by a calculating killer. The investigation focused on the logistical requirements of the crime. Storing a human body for a year required a large freezer, likely a commercial-grade unit, significant energy consumption, and a secure private location where the body would not be discovered. Investigators began the arduous task of analyzing energy consumption records for the surrounding counties, looking for anomalies that might indicate the presence of a large, continuously running freezer. They cross-referenced this data with records of commercial-grade freezer purchases in the months leading up to and following Seraphine's disappearance. They investigated hunting lodges, meat processing facilities, and isolated properties near the Cypress Swamp Reserve. The data pool was immense, the task daunting. The analysis yielded hundreds of potential leads. Each lead had to be investigated. A slow, meticulous process involving interviews, surveillance, and background checks. Weeks turned into months. Despite the intensive effort, the data yielded no immediate suspects. The perpetrator had successfully hidden their crime in plain sight, leaving no discernible trace of the storage location. The investigation stalled again. The initial shock of the python discovery and the forensic breakthrough faded, and the case began to drift back toward the cold case archives. The complexity of the crime and the lack of physical evidence from the original crime scene made progress nearly impossible. It was in 2020, nearly 2 years after Seraphine's disappearance, that a fresh perspective was brought to the case. Detective Lena Santos, a meticulous investigator from the Cold Case Unit, began a comprehensive review of the entire case file. Santos was spurred by the evidence that the initial investigation in 2018 was flawed. perhaps critically so. The freezing evidence proved that the prevailing theory at the time that Serafina died in the swamp was wrong. Santos decided to re-examine the initial search effort from the ground up, looking for anomalies, missed opportunities, or anything that might explain how the crime scene, wherever it was missed or overlooked. Santos spent weeks immersed in the 2018 files. She analyzed the search coordination logs, the deployment maps, the witness statements, the communication records from the command center. She focused on the decisions made during the critical first days of the search, the period when the trail was freshest. It was during this review that she encountered the contamination zone. The reports detailed the closure of a significant section of the park due to an accidental pesticide spill. The closure had diverted ground teams away from key areas near Seraphine's last known location. At the time, it was treated as an unfortunate obstacle, a bureaucratic hurdle that hampered the search effort. But in light of the new evidence that Serafina was murdered and her body stored, the timing and location of the spill seemed suspiciously convenient. It had effectively shut down the search in a critical area during the most crucial window of the investigation. Santos decided to verify the incident report for the chemical spill. It was a routine check, a matter of due diligence. She started by contacting the environmental agency, requesting records of the reported pesticide, overspray in August 2018. A spill of a restricted pesticide would generate a significant paper trail involving mandatory reporting and cleanup protocols. The environmental agency conducted a thorough search of their database. Their response was startling. There was no record of any such incident in the Cypress Swamp Reserve or the surrounding areas during that time period. Puzzled, Santos contacted the state agricultural agencies, the regulatory bodies responsible for pesticide use in Georgia. They too found no record of a spill. She then attempted to contact the private land management firm named in the police report as being responsible for the overspray. She discovered that the company did not exist. The conclusion was chilling and undeniable. The chemical spill was entirely fabricated. The contamination zone was a lie. A ghost story invented to obstruct the search for Serafina and Kieran. The implications were profound. It meant that someone with authority, someone inside the investigation, had intentionally sabotaged the search from the beginning. The focus immediately shifted to the officer who authorized the closure of the zone, Detective Julian Hayes. The police liaison during the initial search was the one who reported the spill and enforced the closure. He had actively steered the investigation away from the restricted area, promoting the theory that Serafina had wandered deep into the swamp. He had been the architect of the misdirection. Detective Santos presented her findings to Internal Affairs. The realization that a police officer might be involved in the cover-up of a murder and kidnapping was explosive. Hayes was immediately placed under investigation. A deep financial audit was initiated. Investigators began discreetly monitoring Hayes' activities, analyzing his communications, his movements, his behavior. They needed to understand the extent of the corruption, and more importantly, who Hayes was working for. Hayes, a veteran detective with years of experience reading the signs of an investigation, sensed the scrutiny, the sudden chill from his colleagues, the restricted access to case files, the feeling of being watched. He knew that the fabrication of the chemical spill was being uncovered. The realization triggered a desperate, panicked response. Late one night, long after the precinct had emptied, Hayes made a critical mistake. He used his authorization code to access the department's archival server room. The room, located in the basement of the headquarters, housed the physical servers containing the digital records of past investigations, including the detailed coordination logs and communications from the 2018 search. Hayes believed he could physically destroy the servers, erasing the digital trail of his actions. the records of the fabricated spill, the communications authorizing the closure. If the data was gone, the evidence against him would be circumstantial. He entered the climate-controlled room, the air cold, the silence broken only by the worry of the cooling fans and the hum of the servers. He didn't know that internal affairs, investigators anticipating such a move, had placed the server room under surveillance. They were watching him on the security cameras, recording his desperate attempt to destroy evidence. As Hayes struggled with the server rack, the hard drive finally coming loose in his hand, the door burst open. Internal affairs investigators flooded the room, their weapons drawn, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the dim light. Detective Hayes, step away from the server. Hayes spun around, his face pale with shock and fear. The hard drive clattering to the floor, he was caught in the act, the dismantled server components scattered at his feet. The confrontation was tense, brief. Hayes, cornered and exposed, offered no resistance. He was arrested, suspended from duty, and the investigation escalated from an internal review to a criminal probe. The exposure of the fabricated chemical spill and Hayes' desperate attempt to destroy the evidence confirmed the existence of a conspiracy. The investigation now had a clear target, but the question remained: who was pulling the strings? Who had the power and the motive to corrupt a seasoned police detective and orchestrate such an elaborate cover-up? The arrest of Detective Julian Hayes sent shockwaves through the department and the local community. The evidence of his corruption was undeniable, but the motivation remained the central question. Fabricating a chemical spill to obstruct a missing persons investigation, particularly one involving an infant, was an extreme measure. It suggested a powerful external influence, someone willing to pay a high price to keep the truth hidden. The investigation focused on the financial audit of Hayes' accounts. The internal affairs investigators, now working with forensic accountants from the state attorney's office, dug deep into Hayes' finances. The audit revealed a series of large cash deposits starting the day after Serafina Kalin disappeared in August 2018. The deposits were irregular, structured to avoid triggering mandatory reporting requirements, and completely inconsistent with Hayes' salary. The total amount exceeded $150,000 over the course of the 2 years since the disappearance. The cash deposits were difficult to trace, but the forensic accountants began the meticulous process of analyzing Hayes' financial activities, looking for connections, patterns, anything that might reveal the source of the money. They tracked the complex money laundering scheme Hayes had used to disguise the funds, channeling the cash through a series of intermediaries, small businesses, and shell accounts. It was a sophisticated operation, suggesting Hayes had assistance in hiding the money. After months of intensive forensic accounting following the trail through a labyrinth of transactions, they finally traced the origin of the funds back to a shell corporation registered in Nevada. The corporation, named Osprey Holdings Group, had no visible business activities, its sole purpose seemingly to obscure the flow of money. The investigation then focused on identifying the individuals behind Osprey Holdings Group. The ownership structure was opaque, hidden behind layers of legal firewalls, but the investigators persisted, utilizing subpoenas and court orders to compel the disclosure of the corporate records. The trail led them to a name that resonated with power and influence in South Georgia: Alistair Thorne. Alistair Thorne was a wealthy, politically connected real estate developer. He was known for his extensive landholdings bordering the Cypress Swamp Reserve, his lavish lifestyle, and his ruthless business practices. He was a major political donor, his influence extending deep into the local government. He was also known for his passion for alligator hunting, often organizing private hunts on his vast properties and within the accessible areas of the Cypress Swamp Reserve. The connection between Alistair Thorne and the disappearance of Serafina Kalin was not immediately obvious. Thorne moved in circles far removed from Seraphine's life as a part-time nurse, but the financial link to Hayes was undeniable. The investigation now had a prime suspect, a powerful adversary, who had the resources and the influence to orchestrate the cover-up. But they needed more than just a money trail. They needed evidence linking Thorne directly to the crime. Investigators began a discreet probe into Alistair Thorne and his family, including his son, Caleb Thorne, who was 19 at the time of Seraphine's disappearance. They analyzed their movements in August 2018, their activities, their connections, but the Thornes were insulated by their wealth and influence. Their properties were secure, their activities private. The investigation faced a formidable challenge. As the corruption investigation proceeded, focusing intensely on the Thorne family, an unrelated breakthrough occurred thousands of miles away. A development that would unexpectedly converge with the Kalin case and break it wide open. It was late 2021. Europol, in coordination with local authorities in Central Europe, conducted a series of coordinated raids on a high-end human trafficking ring operating out of Moldavia. The ring specialized in illicit adoptions, procuring infants and young children for wealthy clients around the world. They provided a full service from the acquisition of the child to the creation of fraudulent documents and the transportation across international borders. The raids were the culmination of a long-term investigation into the activities of Viktor Volkov, the elusive and ruthless head of the organization. During the raid on Volkov's headquarters, a heavily fortified compound, authorities apprehended Volkov and seized encrypted servers containing the organization's records, client lists, financial transactions, communication logs. The data was vast, complex, protected by sophisticated encryption. Europol's cybercrime unit began the painstaking process of decrypting and analyzing the seized data. It was during this analysis, deep within the encrypted files, that they discovered a record that immediately drew their attention. The record detailed the smuggling of an American infant from Georgia in late August 2018. The infant, described as a male approximately 6 months old, matched the description of Kieran Kalin. The transaction was categorized as a priority extraction, commissioned by a high-paying anonymous client. The details of the transportation, the fraudulent documents, and the final destination were meticulously logged. The discovery was immediately flagged and relayed to US authorities. The timing and location were too specific to be a coincidence. The possibility that Kieran Kalin had been trafficked overseas electrified the investigation in Georgia. Detective Santos and her team compared the timing of the smuggling operation with the financial data from the Thorne investigation. They focused on the shell corporation Osprey Holdings Group, controlled by Alistair Thorne. They discovered a massive wire transfer totaling several $100,000 from Osprey Holdings Group to an offshore account linked to Viktor Volkov's organization. The transfer occurred during the same week the baby was reportedly smuggled from Georgia. The convergence of the two investigations was staggering. The connection between Seraphine's murder, the corruption of Detective Hayes, and the international human trafficking ring solidified. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Alistair Thorne had orchestrated the cover-up of Seraphine's death and the trafficking of her infant son. The realization that Kieran might still be alive, now 3 years old, living somewhere in Central Europe, injected a new, desperate urgency into the investigation. The focus shifted from simply proving the murder to rescuing the child. The investigation now had the evidence needed to confront the perpetrators. The time had come to dismantle the conspiracy and bring the truth to light. The evidence connecting Alistair Thorne to Serafina Kallin's murder and Kieran Kallin's abduction was overwhelming. The financial trail linking Thorne to the corrupt detective Julian Hayes and the international human trafficker Viktor Volkov provided the leverage needed to dismantle the conspiracy. The investigation moved quickly. The priority now, the rescue of Kieran. The first target was Detective Hayes. He was already in custody, facing charges of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and corruption. Now armed with the irrefutable evidence of the bribery, the fabricated chemical spill, and the connection to the human trafficking ring, investigators confronted Hayes with the full weight of the case. They presented him with the Europol data, the wire transfers, the undeniable proof that his actions had facilitated not just a cover-up, but the trafficking of a child. The interrogation was intense. Hayes, facing the prospect of federal charges related to human trafficking and potentially accessory to murder, realized the extent of his predicament. The years of deception, the weight of his complicity, finally broke him. The prosecutors offered him a narrow window for cooperation. Hayes confessed. He admitted that Alistair Thorne had paid him to fabricate the chemical spill story. The purpose was to keep searchers away from a specific area of the Cypress Swamp Reserve, a remote access road near the Thorne family's extensive land holdings where the crime had occurred. Hayes claimed he didn't know the full details of the crime at the time, only that Thorne needed the area secured, and the investigation steered away from his family. He provided the details of their arrangement, the communication protocols, the payment schedule. He gave them everything they needed to move against the Thornes. Hayes' confession provided the final piece of the puzzle, the direct testimony needed to secure search warrants for the Thorne estate. The operation was planned meticulously. The Thorne estate was sprawling, a heavily secured compound bordering the Cypress Swamp Reserve. The risk of confrontation or the destruction of evidence was high. The Thornes were wealthy, armed, and desperate. A coordinated, high-stakes SWAT operation was authorized. The target was the arrest of Alistair Thorne and his son, Caleb Thorne, now 22 years old. The operation involved federal agents, state police, and the local SWAT team. At dawn, the operation commenced. A convoy of armored vehicles supported by helicopters overhead descended on the Thorne estate. They breached the gates and secured the perimeter, moving rapidly toward the main villa. The silence of the early morning was shattered by the roar of the engines, the chopping of the helicopter blades, and the shouts of the SWAT team. The team assigned to the main villa moved quickly, breaching the entrance with a controlled explosion and fanning out through the opulent rooms. The interior was vast, a maze of corridors and luxurious furnishings. They found Alistair Thorne in his study, seemingly preparing for his day, oblivious to the impending raid. He was arrested without incident, his demeanor cold, arrogant, and defiant, even as the handcuffs were secured around his wrists. Simultaneously, another team moved to secure Caleb Thorne. He was in the guest house, a smaller residence located several hundred yards from the main villa. But as the police vehicles approached, Caleb heard the commotion. He looked out the window, saw the flashing lights and the armored vehicles converging on the estate. Panic seized him. Caleb bolted from the guest house, jumping into a high off-road vehicle parked nearby. He gunned the engine and tore across the expansive property, heading toward the dense wilderness of the Cypress Swamp Reserve bordering the estate. He knew the terrain intimately, having hunted there since childhood. The chase was immediate, tense. The SWAT team pursued Caleb in their vehicles, the off-road terrain making the chase difficult and dangerous. Caleb drove recklessly, weaving through the trees, attempting to reach the inaccessible areas of the swamp where he believed he could escape. The helicopter monitoring the operation tracked his movements. The thermal imaging camera locked on the heat signature of the vehicle, relaying his position to the pursuing ground teams. The chase spanned several miles of the Thorne property, a high-speed pursuit through the rugged landscape. Caleb pushed the vehicle to its limits, but the coordinated effort of the ground teams and the air support was too much. They managed to corner him, cutting off his escape route near a deep canal. Caleb, realizing he was trapped, abandoned the vehicle and attempted to flee on foot, scrambling into the dense undergrowth. He was apprehended after a brief struggle, his face pale with fear, the realization of his situation finally sinking in. With both Alistair and Caleb Thorne in custody, the investigation focused on the search of the estate. The priority was to locate the evidence of the murder, specifically the freezer used to store Seraphina Kalen's body. The estate was vast with multiple buildings, storage facilities, and hunting lodges. The search was meticulous, systematic. Crime scene investigators, armed with the knowledge of the freezing, evidence focused on areas capable of housing a large freezer. It was in the basement of the main villa that they found it. Concealed behind a false wall in a large storage area was a commercial-grade walk-in freezer. It was the kind used in restaurants or for storing large quantities of game meat. It was running, the temperature inside well below freezing. The freezer was empty, recently cleaned, the surfaces scrubbed spotless, the air inside smelling faintly of bleach. But the forensic teams knew that cleaning a freezer used to store a human body for a year would not erase all traces of evidence. They began the meticulous process of forensic analysis. They used luminol, a chemical that reacts with the iron and hemoglobin, causing it to glow blue in the dark. They sprayed the interior of the freezer. The surfaces glowed faintly, indicating the presence of blood that had been cleaned. But the critical evidence came from the hidden areas, the places where cleaning would be difficult, the microscopic crevices where biological material could accumulate. Investigators focused on the rubber seals around the freezer door, the intricate grooves where fluids could seep and become trapped. They dismantled the drainage system, the pipes where condensation and fluids would collect. The forensic teams collected samples, conducting preliminary tests on site. The results were positive. They found trace evidence of Seraphina blood and DNA preserved within the seals and the drainage system of the freezer. The discovery was the final irrefutable proof. The freezer confirmed where Seraphine's body had been stored for a year, linking the Thorns directly to the murder and the elaborate cover-up. The chain of evidence was complete. Alistair and Caleb Thorne were interrogated separately at the Federal Detention Center. The weight of the evidence against them, the financial records linking them to Hayes and Volkov. Hayes' confession, the DNA evidence recovered from the freezer, was insurmountable. Under the intense pressure of interrogation, Caleb Thorne broke down. The fear and guilt suppressed for nearly 3 years finally surfaced. He confessed to his role in the crime, the details spilling out in a torrent of panicked words. Caleb admitted that on August 22, 2018, he was driving his truck on a service access road in the Cypress Swamp Reserve. He was 19 years old, intoxicated, illegally hunting alligators. He was driving recklessly, speeding down the narrow road. When he rounded a bend and struck Seraphina Kalen, the impact was sudden, brutal. Seraphina was thrown to the ground, knocked unconscious, bleeding profusely from a head wound. Caleb stopped the truck, panicking. He saw Seraphina lying on the road, the baby strapped to her chest. Miraculously, Seraphina had shielded Kieran. During the fall, the infant was unharmed, crying, but alive. Caleb, drunk and terrified of the consequences, a potential DUI manslaughter charge that would destroy his future, called his father. Alistair Thorne arrived at the scene quickly. He assessed the situation with cold calculation. He saw his son intoxicated, the injured woman, the crying baby. In a ruthless decision to protect his son and his family's reputation, Alistair took control. Instead of calling for help, Alistair loaded the unconscious Seraphina and the crying Kieran into his truck. He drove them back to the estate. There, in the secluded basement of the main villa, Alistair murdered the injured Seraphina, ensuring her silence. He then placed her body in the commercial-grade walk-in freezer, preserving it while he orchestrated the cover-up. He immediately contacted Detective Hayes, utilizing his influence and promising a substantial payment to fabricate the chemical spill, keeping the search away from the accident site. The baby Kieran presented a different problem. Alistair couldn't kill the infant, but he couldn't keep him either. He used his connections in the criminal underworld to contact Viktor Volkov's organization. He arranged for Kieran to be handed over to the human trafficking ring a few weeks later, paying a substantial fee for the illicit adoption and the guarantee that the child would disappear without a trace. Seraphine's body remained in the freezer. For a year, when the case went cold and the public attention faded, Alistair decided to dispose of the body. He removed it from the freezer, dismembered it to facilitate the disposal, and dumped the parts deep in the cypress swamp reserve, hoping the scavengers would erase the evidence of his crime. He never anticipated that a Burmese python would consume the remains and reveal the truth. The confessions were detailed, chilling. The crime was not premeditated murder, but a series of calculated, ruthless decisions, driven by a desperate attempt to protect wealth and privilege. With the confessions secured and the evidence compiled, the focus shifted to the rescue of Kieran Kalin, utilizing the information from the seized servers and the Thorns' confessions. Europol tracked the smuggling route. They identified the adoptive family in Central Europe. The family, unaware of the horrific circumstances of the adoption, had been deceived by Volkov's organization. The process was delicate, complex, involving international diplomacy and legal negotiations. Finally, after weeks of coordination, authorities located Kieran, now 3 years old. He was healthy, safe, unaware of his tragic past. Alara Caldwell immediately traveled to Central Europe. The journey was a blur of anxiety and hope. After nearly 3 years of agonizing grief, she was finally going to see her grandson. The reunion took place at a government facility. Ilara waited in a quiet room, her heart pounding. The door opened and a social worker walked in, holding the hand of a small boy. The moment Ilara saw Kieran, the resemblance to Serafina was unmistakable. The years of grief, the weight of the loss, finally lifted. She knelt down, tears streaming down her face, and opened her arms. Alistair and Caleb Thorne were charged with murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. They both received lengthy prison sentences, their wealth and influence unable to shield them from the consequences of their crimes. Julian Hayes was convicted for his role in the conspiracy and imprisoned. Ilara Caldwell gained full custody of Kieran, returning to Georgia to begin a new life, honoring Seraphine's memory by providing Kieran with the love and security his mother had fought so hard to give him. That's it for tonight's story. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sleep tight, and I'll see you in the next one.